My mother was diagnosed with mesothelioma in 2014, and we found the foundation immediately, and it was really a godsend to our entire family and continues to be. We've got a family connection to this as well. I joined the board a few years ago, and that too has been such a blessing to me to be part of this. And I am an attorney. I live in Louisville, Kentucky. I do not practice in the mesothelioma space. I do estate planning and elder law and other kinds of things. But with my mom's diagnosis, our family did have a lawsuit at the time. So I've been through that process as well. So I'm honored to have these two quite capable mesothelioma lawyers up here with us. And so we're going to start with Joe Belluck, and he's got some slides that he'll go through, and then we'll just facilitate some questions and answers and go for about 40 minutes or so. So Joe, over to you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate you staying here towards the end of this. We know, because we've been doing this work for 25 years, that this is a long day for a lot of you, so we very much appreciate it. I've been here since the morning, and I don't think you could get better medical information and up-to-date information than you got today. I've been doing this work for 25 years, and I learned a lot just listening to the amazing doctors and researchers who are trying to help. And we also know as attorneys that your primary goal is to get good treatment, to extend your lives as long as possible. We try to help you do that, but we're very cognizant that the legal part of this is often a secondary concern or something that you feel is necessary to pursue to get the funds to protect your families and help pay for treatment. I do want to say one thing about BAP1. It's not a cause of mesothelioma. Asbestos is the cause of mesothelioma. This is a battle that we fight in the courtrooms around the country every day right now. So I just want to be clear about that. My law firm actually paid for some of the initial BAP1 research that was done at NYU with Harvey Pass and some other folks, and we did that work to try to find biomarkers for mesothelioma, not to interfere with the work that we do as lawyers. So the NCI is doing incredible work on this, but just to be clear, BAP1's not the cause of mesothelioma. We know what the cause is, and the only cause is asbestos exposure. So I also, just before I begin, wanted to give a shout out to all the law firms that are supporting this conference. We are competitors, but we're also colleagues. We share a lot of information. We work together when we can to take on these big corporations. So Monty Reichel and Gorey Julian and the Early Law Firm have also contributed to support this work, and they deserve credit as well. And like I said, we're a close-knit community, and we share a lot of information. Even though we are competitors, we do work together when necessary to help you and your families. So I just wanted to briefly go through some of the legal options for people who have mesothelioma. I'm going to do that sort of quickly because we want to allow some time for questions. But there are a number of compensation legal options for people who have mesothelioma. And the law firms that represent people like mesothelioma, like Dawn's firm and my firm, we help with all of these things. We're sort of one-stop shopping. So the first one is mesothelioma trust funds. There's a lot of confusion about this. A lot of our clients think there's a big trust fund that the government has set up to compensate people for mesothelioma. That's not true, okay? In some ways, it's the fault of lawyers advertising to give you that impression. In some ways, it's the media also. But the reality is that there are lots of companies that made asbestos products. A number of them, about 50, have filed for bankruptcy. And when they file for bankruptcy, they set up an individual trust fund for that company. So a company like Johns Manville or Owens Corning has an individual trust fund for that company. And if you were exposed to that product and can show that you have mesothelioma or lung cancer, you can file a claim with that trust fund, and they will pay you what we call a scheduled amount, okay? It's like a matrix. They plug in some information about you, they spit out an amount, and as your lawyer, we help you do that, okay? So those are the trust funds. In reality, it's a small part of the compensation you receive. It's a little bit easier because it's not filing a lawsuit, but it's the values that these trust funds pay are lower than what you typically get in a lawsuit. So one thing that we do for you is file these trust fund claims. One of the main things we do for you is file a lawsuit on your behalf in the court where we think you'll get the best result. That could be the state that you were exposed, the state where the shipyard was that you worked at or served in. It could be where you live. Every state has different laws, and one of the things that we do as lawyers is figure out what's the best place to file a case for you. That could be New York or California or Illinois, but we take a work history, we take a life history. What did your parents do? What did you do? Where did you go to school? Do you have hobbies? We're trying to figure out any way you might have been exposed to asbestos, and then we come up with a strategy of where to file the case. And again, every state is different. Some states are faster, some states have better law, some states the juries award more money. So those are some of the factors that we're looking at. So individual lawsuits, that's another path that we pursue for you. Workers' compensation. That involves a claim against your employer. In some states, you can sue your employer, like Pennsylvania, but in many states, you can't. You have to use the workers' compensation system. Your employer purchased insurance, and there's an availability of a workers' compensation claim that we file against your employer to collect money from their workers' compensation insurance carrier. So that's another component of this. And again, that depends on what state you live in and where the case is filed. Veterans benefits. If you served in the military and were exposed to asbestos and you have mesothelioma, there's a disability benefit available. It's a service connection disability that you can get from the Veterans Administration. It's not the best process. It's slow. They do not handle the claims the way they should. If you follow any media, you know what goes on with the VA with respect to veterans' health care and veterans' disability. But it is a decent benefit. It's a monthly benefit. There's a portion of it that can be retroactive and a portion that can be available for your family. And there are also VA hospitals that can provide medical treatment. Again, they may not be the best place to go for medical treatment, but they can be a resource for certain things like prescriptions and testing and some other things. And some of them provide very good care. So if you're a veteran, there are these benefits available. Our law firms help with those veterans' claims. Social Security disability. If you're working and you get mesothelioma, you can file for Social Security disability. It also qualifies you for Medicare, even if you're under the age for Medicare. So that's another thing that your lawyer can help you with, is filing a Social Security disability claim in the right circumstances to enhance your Social Security benefit or get a Social Security benefit, and also potentially qualify you for Medicare. Disability insurance. If you're working, your employer may have a disability policy, or you may have purchased one on your own. This is another benefit that your lawyer can help navigate through. It may provide some additional compensation for you. And lastly, health insurance. It's a very important part of benefits that are available to you, whether it's Medicare based on age, Medicaid based on income, a private policy, a supplemental policy. It's a very important thing to talk to your lawyer about, because these programs will provide the first level of payment for your health care, but they're also going to want to get paid back through a lien, and your lawyer needs to be involved from the beginning to help minimize what the payback is and negotiate the best reimbursement for them. So all of our offices, all the firms involved with this, we have dedicated people that all they do is deal with these medical liens and try to negotiate the lowest payback, so the money we recover for you goes to you and not just to these medical insurance programs, whether they be government or private. I just wanted to briefly sort of go through what we do, and again, it's similar for most law firms that do this. When you contact our firm or these other firms, we get back to you very quickly, usually the same day. And we either over the phone, by Zoom, or in person, depending on your preference, take down information about you, okay? Biographical information, your name, address, date of birth, where you were born, what your parents did for a living, where did you go to school, what did you do for a living, what did your spouse or partner do for a living, what did your kids do for a living, do you have any hobbies, did you do any work outside of work, like work on your own automobiles or do work in your house. We are trying to figure out any possible connection to asbestos that you've had for two reasons. One, it helps us get the best result for you, but also in these cases, the way that these big asbestos companies defend themselves is to try to find some other way that you were exposed to blame, okay? So anybody who's a parent and has kids, they understand this. It wasn't me. That's what they do in these cases. So the best way that we can help you is to be thorough in understanding all of the exposures that you've had. If you agree to move forward, we have you sign a retainer agreement. All of the firms involved here, depending on the state, work on a contingency fee. That means you don't pay us anything unless we recover money for you. And if we recover money for you, we take a percentage of what we recover. That's the basic contract. There's no financial risk to you to hire us, because if we don't recover money for you, you never have to write us a check. All of us, as you're moving through this, do a lot of preparation in investigating the claim, preparing you to testify, meeting with you. We are very skilled at this type of work. We know a lot of the job sites or trades that you worked in. We know who made the products that you worked with. And we, depending on where you worked and what you did, prepare the case for you and also prepare you to testify in these cases. We then file what's called a complaint against the companies that were responsible for exposing you to asbestos. Again, we know that. Many of these areas of work, there weren't 20 companies that made the products. There were 5 or 6, and we know who those are, and we know what areas of the country they sold the product, what years it contained asbestos, what it looked like, how you would use it. And we help prepare you to be a participant in the case by talking you through that. The companies we sue have an opportunity to answer. That's basically them filing a court document saying we've gotten the complaint and we're engaged. And then we get into what lawyers call discovery, which is exchanging information about you, and most importantly, having you testify at a deposition. This is the most critical part of the case, because everything that we do is based on this deposition. It's based on the testimony. If you're not able to testify, we try to use family members or coworkers to supplement the testimony and build the case. But this is the most critical part, and if you're working with a law firm, this is the part that you need to demand they give you full attention to, because this is the part that is the basis for everything, okay? my firm, I think the other firms do this, we go to your home, we meet with you, we prepare you, we go over the questions, we talk about, what the law is and what type of work you did, and we're with you during the deposition physically, we're next to you, and help getting you through. And it's not an easy process because you all know better than we do. You're undergoing treatment. There are good days and bad days. It's a tiring process. You're talking. You're already short of breath in many instances. And part of the specialty we have is getting you through this process. It's a skill that we've all developed, managing the time and managing the process to get the testimony done. So with that,
Testing 1, 2, check 1, check 2.
good time to stop. Thank you all very much. I'm going to sit down and we'll go from there.
All right, thank you, Joe. Okay, so now is the time for questions. I have some questions that I'm going to ask, and I'm already seeing hands go up, so that's good too. Maya, are you going to help? Okay. So as Maya walks back there, I'm going to throw a question, Dawn, out to you as we get started. Can you talk about why it's important to contact a lawyer very quickly after a diagnosis?
Sure, Cheryl, thank you. I'm Dawn Besserman again. My firm is Monty Rakel Hartley.
Hold it closer. It might be, but hold it closer to your mouth, maybe.
Is this better?
Yes.
Okay, great. Again, my name is Dawn Besserman. I'm from the firm Monty Rakel Hartley French and Mudd. Cheryl's question is an important question and something that every person and family member of a person diagnosed with mesothelioma needs to keep in mind. Of course, when you're first diagnosed, it is absolutely devastating news, and the most important thing that you should be thinking about and taking care of is your medical care and treatment. But the legal side of your situation is very important, and each state has different laws, including the trust funds that Joe just talked about. There are limitations on the amount of time that you have in every state and with every trust to file a claim. And some of those limitations can be very, very short, a year or even potentially less. So it's very important that you don't delay too long. I know that it can be extremely overwhelming, but I will tell you, the worst thing that happens when we first talk with someone who calls our office is to hear, I was diagnosed 5 years ago, or my mom passed away 5 years ago. And most of the time, in almost every situation, that's going to be way past the limitations period, and there isn't going to be any legal recovery, any financial compensation that your lawyer will be able to get for you. So it is really important, while there are things medically that you need to take care of first and foremost, you can't forget or continue to push aside the legal because you are overwhelmed. So I really do urge every person that is diagnosed with the disease and their family to contact an attorney and find out what their rights are and what those limitations are in their case so that they can govern their conduct accordingly. You don't want to let that time period just slip by and be barred from pursuing any recovery.
Yeah.
And
They're tricky.
Yeah, I would even go a step further because many times when we're contacted, this literally just happened to me, the client said, I want to get my medical treatment squared away before I hire you. And first of all, whether you're filing a lawsuit or filing a trust claim, you're going to be in line behind the people that file before you. So no good comes from waiting, because if you wait 2, 3, 4 months to file, you're going to be 3, 4 months down the road. And these companies do go bankrupt. The funds do become more limited. The insurance policies become more limited. And also, we need you to participate. We need you to testify. We need you to help us understand what you did. And as you go through the treatment process, anybody in this room who's been through chemotherapy or immunotherapy or surgery, understands that sometimes can limit your ability to participate because you're tired, you're sick, you're not up to it. So getting this out of the way early and letting us get the process started is only going to benefit you in terms of getting compensation.
All right, thank you, Joe. So, question.
Hi, thank you. My name's Laura, and a couple questions. What percentage of your cases actually go to court?
That's a good question. A very, very small percentage actually go to trial.
Yeah.
And when I say very small, we're talking single-digit percentages. The vast majority of these cases do settle out of court, and for good reason, and that's because the conduct of these companies that made the products that exposed people to asbestos is egregious, and those companies at the end of the day know that they don't want a jury to be deciding their fate.
Uh-huh.
And just one sort of add-on to that when you're picking a law firm. You want to pick a law firm that, even though the case is likely to settle, is willing to go to trial. Because I have some news for you. This may be shocking. The companies that made asbestos products are not paying you settlements because they feel bad about what happened. They're paying settlements because they're afraid about being in the courtroom. Yeah. So they know which firms are willing to go to trial, and they know which firms are not. And the values differ dramatically. And just like you heard from the doctors, get to a mesothelioma center, get to a mesothelioma lawyer like Dawn or myself or these other firms, because we're going to give you the representation that's going to get you the best result.
All right. And then my other question, thank you. My other question is, does the family members have any grounds to sue if they're not the patient?
Yes, they do.
And how does that work?
Okay, so let me just explain. There are probably at least two different subsets of family members that do have rights under the law. The first is the spouse. The law, and I believe every state recognizes that if you're married to someone and that person is injured, you suffer an injury as well. During the course of their treatment, you suffer what's called a loss of consortium, and the law allows the injured party's spouse to also recover damages for their suffering and the damage that the disease has done to the marriage, and financially, if for instance you have to take off work to help care for your husband, or you have to bring in other people to perform services around the house. Those are all kinds of damages that are taken into account that those companies are responsible for. If the injured person passes away, then the family also has a right to recover under states' wrongful death statutes. And each state has a different statute and a set of guidelines as to who has the right to recover. Obviously, if there are minor children involved, those children almost always have a right to recover damages. The spouse has a right to recover damages. Sometimes adult children, even though they're not financially dependent, also have a right to recover damages.
Or they are. What if an adult child that is financially dependent?
Is financially dependent? Absolutely.
Yeah.
They have, generally, I think every state recognizes that a financially dependent adult child also has a right of recovery for loss of a parent upon which they were dependent.
Okay, thank you very much.
And let me just say one thing about your question, which is an excellent question. And it's a hard subject to talk about, but having a clear will, having a clear estate plan is one of the best things you can do, because in many states, when someone passes away, the person who controls the legal process is the executor of the estate. And the people that benefit are the beneficiaries in the will. So, for example, if you're living with somebody who you're not married to, in many states, that person may not have any rights to do anything. It's the heirs, the kids, or something like that. So, and among your children, you may have one child who you want to be responsible for interacting with us. So, having a very clear will, we have an estate expert here, is a really good thing to do, even though it sometimes can be uncomfortable to talk about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good points. Okay, question here? Yes, just one point. do you remember what you were going to ask? No? Oh, okay. All right. So let's see. When you're choosing an attorney, we've already talked about making sure that you go with a firm that's experienced, like our centers of excellence with our doctors. But what are some of the other factors that you all think are important if people are interviewing, contacting law firms, and trying to decide which one is the best for them?
Sure, you should always do your research before you even meet with a firm. Research as much as you can about that firm and be prepared when you sit down and meet with the representative from that law firm. You have a list of questions and that they're able to answer your questions. The questions that I recommend asking every person that you interview include things like experience, ability or desire to go to trial, and ask them what their trial experience is. Some firms are advertising for cases, and they are really settlement mills, and they are never going to actually take a case all the way through to a jury. And the reality is that the defendants know that, and those types of firms probably aren't getting the same settlement values that firms that are committed to seeing a case through trial will get for a client. It's important to ask who's actually going to be working on your case. Is the person who came to meet with you the person that's going to be handling your case? How is your case going to be handled once that person leaves your living room? Are you going to be assigned to an entire team, and what does that team look like? What is the process for handling your case once that person walks out the door with a signed retainer agreement? Those are important questions. You want to know if the people that you're speaking with are actually going to represent you, or whether they're going to refer your case to another firm. Because obviously you want control over who's going to be working on your case, and the worst thing that can happen is you sign with a law firm and then later find out that they're referring your case to another firm for handling. You want to know the experience of the folks that are going to be working on your case. Another thing that is important to find out is how much of their time do they spend working on mesothelioma cases versus other types of law. At my firm, we only handle mesothelioma cases, so we are 100% dedicated to that particular type of law. There are other firms that spread out their practice, and there are attorneys that spread out their individual practice. So you want to know how experienced and how specialized are the attorneys that are actually going to be working on your case. There are a million good questions that you can ask, but you really need to do your homework. And at the end of the day, you need to make sure that you're comfortable with your legal team. If there's something that feels off, if you feel like you don't quite trust them, there's probably a good reason for that, and you should continue talking to people until you find the right fit for you and your family. And I would also suggest that you look at, you ask them what they're thinking in terms of where your case likely could be filed. Do they have attorneys that are licensed there? Do they have an office there? Are they familiar with that judge and court system? Those are all important questions as well. I'm sure Joe can think of.
Yep, good. Okay, did you remember your question now?
So in regards to the statute of limitations, if a company becomes identified that they had asbestos exposure after you've already settled your other suits, how does that work? I mean, for long-term survivors or family members, how does that work? So if a company just gets put in the media that they have potentially exposed a lot of people, and you had, used that product, and it's been 5 years since your diagnosis, are you still eligible for that, or is it case by case?
It's probably, that's a really broad question, and it is somewhat case specific. If the statute of limitations has passed, probably you're not going to be able to pursue a claim against that product manufacturer. There are exceptions. For instance, if a company would later file for bankruptcy and a trust is created, oftentimes we're able to go back and examine exposures that a client may have had at a particular site that later becomes approved for payment under a trust. So that's a very good question, but there's not an easy black and white answer to it.
Yeah, this is a question that's coming up a lot, in part because of the TELC claims, which were not pursued a lot 5 years ago, 4 years ago, but now are a big part of what we do, both cosmetic TELC and baby powder. And we are trying some creative strategies in trying to deal with that. And we're working on a case right now where we literally filed the case one day before the statute expired. So I would encourage people to reach out to an attorney and let them evaluate the situation if they feel like may have missed the time frame or something, because we'll try. We'll try whatever solution we can. We can't give any guarantees, but we do try.
Yeah.
So it depends on the state. New York is 3 years, the state of Maine is 6 years. It's a state-by-state thing, and that does also impact where we might choose to file it.
The state where you live or the state where the exposure?
It could be either. Sometimes we file where you live, sometimes we file where the exposure occurred. And yeah.
Okay.
I think that you're speaking about primary exposure where somebody was exposed themselves. Can you speak a little bit about the difference to secondary exposure, where you think maybe a family member brought something home that had asbestos?
Sure. I don't know what Dawn's firm's experience is in terms of the percentage, but our firm right now, probably about 20 to 25% are what we call take-home or secondhand cases where either a parent or spouse or partner worked with the asbestos product and brought it home on their clothing. So it's a big part of what we do. Obviously, we need to be able to back that up with experts who talk about it. But, like many things in life, this idea of secondary or take-home exposure is not new. It's not new at all. In fact, the literature about this goes back into the early to mid-1900s. Some of the very first case reports about asbestos disease and mesothelioma came from mines that mined asbestos, and it was family members who were getting sick. And it's part of the presentation that we do in the courtroom about the history of asbestos knowledge. So, there were many ways for employers and companies that made asbestos products to advise workers how to not bring this home on their clothes. Take a shower, change your clothes, things like that. When you get home, take a shower also. There were many, many ways that have been known since the early 1900s, and it really hasn't changed. Right now, part of industrial hygiene is not wearing the clothes from work home, having them laundered at work, taking a shower at work. And so these concepts have been around for a long time, and it's, again, part of the presentation that we make to the courtroom.
I don't have the percentage of cases that we handle that involve secondary exposure. I can tell you that it is a significant portion of our practice. I tried a case in Miami in May of this year, and the only known exposure that my client had was take-home exposure through her husband's work as a professional mechanic. So these cases are common. They can be successful from a legal standpoint in holding the responsible parties accountable. So it is something that if you suspect that you have been exposed through work or asbestos brought into the home by a family member, that's something certainly worth pursuing.
And in fact, sometimes those take-home cases are worth even more because you don't have the workers' comp exclusivity bar. Do you want to talk about how that's different too?
Sure. So oftentimes the person who is working with the asbestos product, in this case that I was just talking about, the mechanic, the husband, he wouldn't, if he had gotten sick, he wouldn't be able to sue his employer, right? But because that's banned by the workers' comp exclusivity in almost every state except, like Joe mentioned, Pennsylvania and a couple others, Missouri. But because she's not an employee, she could sue the employer in that situation. Unfortunately for my client, that employer was no longer in business and there was no trust fund, so there was nothing to pursue there. But that's an important distinction in a take-home case. Oftentimes, we're able to pursue the company that we wouldn't have been able to pursue if it had been a direct exposure case.
Hi. Okay. Thanks for coming and sharing with us your expertise in dealing with the legal parts of this mesothelioma that we suffer with. My question is, and you mentioned that you take the cases on a contingency basis. So when you settle a case, whether it's in court or through the trust funds, is the compensation that you receive standard throughout the industry for each law firm? Is it always the same, or is it different for each law firm?
So, so with the trust funds, it's basically the same, but many of the trust funds do have as part of their algorithm some factor related to the law firm or the jurisdiction that the case is being filed. So there's sort of a standard set of considerations, and then there can be like an add-on for the law firm's history with that company and the jurisdiction that you're filing the case in. So, if your case is filed, for example, in New York, where a lot of my practice is, that's a jurisdiction where the values and the settlements are often higher than, say, if you were in North Dakota, okay? For obvious reasons. Cost of living is different, people make more money, the jury pool is different. So it does matter with the trust funds a little bit which law firm you choose, and with the actual lawsuits, it matters a lot. Because again, as Dawn and I have both mentioned, the insurance companies and the companies themselves, they know the difference between the law firms. They know which law firms are willing to go into court, take a verdict, and get a lot of money from a jury, and which ones are not. And that very much impacts what the settlements are, and they are not standard. It's a negotiation between your lawyer and the insurance companies or the company that we're suing, and who your lawyer is will impact that greatly.
And on the flip side of that, the compensation to the law firm itself, is that standard through the industry? Is it a certain percentage of the compensation that's received, or does each individual law firm have a different percentage that they will expect based on the settlement?
Yeah, so some of that has to do with what state you're involved with. Like in New York, our fees are capped at 1/3, right? There are other law firms that will charge, if you're not in New York, 40%, because their state allows the lawyers to charge up to 40%, right? So some of it depends on which state and which law firm you're dealing with. If you are dealing with a lawyer, trying to select a lawyer, and they say to you, our fee is 40% or our fee is 1/3, I would encourage you to talk to them about lowering that percentage a little bit. Many of us will have that conversation with potential clients. And also, there's another variable, not to overcomplicate or waste too much time on this, but some law firms will deduct their fees from the gross settlement, and some will deduct their fees from the net that goes to the client. So my firm, for example, always takes it out of the gross, which means that the client gets more, as opposed to it coming out of the client net, which means the client gets less. So that's another thing to talk to the lawyer about and say, you know, I'd rather have the expenses come out of the gross rather than the net. If that makes sense.
Okay, question in the back?
Hi, thank you. Thank you for being with us today. You know, I've never pursued legal action because I'm not really sure where I was exposed. I have a hunch as to where I was exposed. You know, does someone like me have a case where they don't really know where they were exposed?
So I'm sure Dawn and I could both talk for hours about this, but you know, the weird thing about mesothelioma and asbestos exposure is that even people who had a lot of asbestos exposure may not know that without talking to someone like Dawn or I and having us go through your life history, either because you may not have realized it could come from a family member, or be in cosmetic products you used, or, you know, you were into ceramics and didn't realize that at a certain point in time clay had asbestos added to it, or you worked at a bowling alley and you didn't realize that the bowling balls had asbestos in the core, so when they're drilled, what you're really getting when you hire a lawyer like Dawn or I is that expertise, sitting down with you, going through your work history, your life history, and figuring out where the exposure occurred. So, Dawn, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I can just follow. Everything Joe said is absolutely accurate. You know, we're specialists in this, and we're used to, we understand we're dealing with a huge latency period, and we're used to going back and historically trying to piece together all the puzzles, all the puzzle pieces in your life history that in which you were exposed to asbestos. So, you know, we have investigators that are committed to trying to uncover every single potential exposure that you may have had in your lifetime. And frequently, our clients come to us and say, I know how I was exposed. I was exposed when I served in the Navy for 2 years. And absolutely, yes, sir, you were exposed when you were serving in the Navy for 2 years. But let's keep talking, because I guarantee you had substantial exposure after that. And we're usually able to uncover many, many exposures that people had that they had no idea that they were working with products that contained asbestos, and they had many exposures that they were completely unaware of.
Right, yep. Okay, thank you all for your questions. Joe and Dawn are going to continue to be here. Our other sponsors as well have their booths outside, so I would encourage you, if you didn't get a question answered, come up and talk to them. Thank you all so much for providing that information. Thank you again for your sponsorships. It means a lot to the foundation and to this event.